Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the time that we have to study again this morning. We're thankful for the way that you work in our lives, things you teach us, and the influence that we can have for good if we follow and serve you. We invite your Spirit here now to instruct us and to correct any errors we may have in our understanding. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm just gonna make sure my microphone's correct. Okay. We're continuing our study in the book of Ezra, and we're looking right now at the second decree, Darius's decree, and we've touched on it already. But we had talked about Haggai and Zechariah. So Haggai and Zechariah are the two prophets that begin after False Smyrtus the rebuilding of the temple. So False Smyrtus, who reigned for a period of 7 months in 522, he's killed by Darius on the Day of Atonement in October 29, 522 BC. So he would have reigned basically from the spring to the fall of 522. And with False Smyrtus, I mean, there's lots of controversy. Some people think that Darius, that it was actually the correct person who was in line for the throne. Some people think he was an imposter. Ellen White says he was an imposter. But you're going to see different views on that. So if you ever research into this area, you're going to see lots of different types of interpretations of this history. And it is somewhat a sketchy history. You're going to see, and I had, before we started the study here, I had in there September of 522 BC, because that's often the position that many scholars have. And I'm not sure why they say September, because it is on the 10th day of the 7th month, which is not going to be in September in 522. Now, I think possibly, and I could be wrong here too. I'm just going to take a look at the Babylonian calendar. So I'll show you what I'm doing. I'll do another share. What's my computer doing? There we go. So this is the Babylonian calendar. And so maybe I should look at the Babylonian calendar for 522. So right now it's 529. So 522 BC. If I go to the 10th month, so right now that's the spring, the 7th month, I mean, and the 10th day. Okay, so I guess it is September 29th. So I'm going to go back and change that because I was just using the biblical calendar. And I don't know if you can see that. I'm just going to blow this up. So what I did, this is that Babylonian calendar converter. And so it shows that, at least according to Parker and Duberstein, in their reconstruction of the Babylonian calendar based on ancient documents, they're going to have the 10th day of the 7th month in the 8th year of Cambyses. So they don't have False Smyrtus in there. That is, they don't count him as one of the kings. That you're going to have 522 BC and September 29th. You're going to have the 10th day of the 7th month as being September 29th. Now, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, they place this a year later. So they're going to place the death of False Smyrtus And I guess I go this way. On the 10th day of the 7th month in 521. Whoops. What did I do there? Go in the wrong direction. And so they're going to have October, and they usually say October 19th. So here it says, October 17th. That's the date they have. So October 17th, 521 BC. And that's the date they have for false Smyrtus. But we can see here that according to this, Parker and Duberstein's work, that this is in the first year of Darius. And if I just go back, they're going to have the first year of Darius as beginning on, so this would be this accession year. And so false Smyrtus basically, I'm just going to go through here. So you'll see when I change from Adaru to, so they actually have it as a, there. So that's going to be the first year of Darius in the spring of 521. So you're not going to have false Smyrtus in 521. So I think the Jewish Encyclopedia is wrong, but I'm not sure why. Hopefully that makes sense to people what we're doing. I'm going to switch back. So I'm going to switch this then to September 29th. So I'll go back here. So this will be September 29th, 522, because we're going to be using the Babylonian calendar, because that's what the Babylonians would have been using. And that's the date that they have then for the death of false Smyrtus. So Darius, his accession year, begins on the 10th day of the 7th month in 522 BC. And we'll see some significance in that. We've already looked at this before, but you're going to see more why this is significant when we look at the story of Esther. So we're going to go through that chronology a little bit as well. So Darius begins his reign. His first year of reign then begins in the spring of 521. And the temple is not being built. That is, because false Smyrtus had put a stop to the building of the temple, the Jews do not continue this work until the prophesying of Haggai and Zechariah. And that prophesying is going to be, for Haggai, all of his visions are at the end of the Jewish year 520 BC. So that's going to be in the second year of Darius. And Zechariah is going to begin his prophesying just before Haggai completes his prophesying. So you'll see Zechariah's first vision is in between Haggai's third and fourth vision. And then Zechariah prophesies after that. So he's going to have Zechariah chapter 1 is all going to be in the second year of Darius. And then Zechariah chapter 7, that vision is going to be in the fourth year of Darius. And then we made a case yesterday that Darius's decree happens in 516 BC. And Ellen White says, as we noted, and I probably should show you the statements, so we'll look at them. Okay, I'm gonna. And Cyrus. So this is Spirit of Prophecy. It's from the Review and Herald. And another time she uses the word score instead of 20. So this is the so she says nearly 20 years passed by. So we have to go back to what she's talking about. She says nearly 50,000 under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Joshua took advantage of this providential opportunity to return. So this is under Cyrus's decree. These were, however, comparatively speaking, only a mere remnant of all the Israelites scattered throughout the provinces of Medo-Persia. Many chose to remain in their land of captivity, rather than to accompany their brethren and to assist in restoring the temple services. Nearly 20 years passed by. Many of the remnant who returned to Judea had fallen into a backslidden condition and were doing no more to restore the house of God than were their brethren living elsewhere in the Medo-Persian realm. But as the result of the appeals of Haggai and Zechariah, the returned exiles repented before God and labored diligently to complete the temple. The Lord blessed them, and they were greatly prospered. Their efforts were brought to the notice of Darius Hystaspes, that's Darius the Persian, Darius the Great, who was the monarch ruling at that time. And he was impressed to issue a second decree, fully as favorable as the one issued by Cyrus over 20 years before. So one of the things we see here is that there's more than 20 years between Cyrus's decree and Darius's decree. There's another statement. See, and I wish I remembered the wording. Oops. Let me see if I can find it. I just used the word score. A score or more years passed when the decree was issued by Darius Hystaspes. So this is, that's that. Yeah, here it is in Prophets and Kings. When a second decree. So this is basically the same. It says a score or more years passed by. So a score is 20. Okay, that's going to be different. Now, what would be the importance of understanding this chronology related to Zechariah and Haggai? I mean, this is chronology. Why are we looking at Haggai's, and we're going to look at Zechariah and Haggai's prophecies themselves? Why is chronology important here? What's that?
Well, it relates to the building of the temple.
Okay, it relates to the building of the temple. Yeah, so chronology is always important, but here in particular, what is the building of the second temple in the second decree typical of?
The midnight cry.
Okay, so this is typical of the midnight cry, or at least the second angel's message. Because the idea here is that, as we have laid this out, is that the first, second, and third decree that begin the 2300 days are parallel to the first, second, and third angel's message that end the 2300 days. And both of these histories are typical of our movement and our time, the reform line that we are in. So when we have this chronology that's so focused upon this history and not so much it is, chronology exists through all these lines, But this sort of particular chronology that happens under the second decree that tells us something about Millerite history and something about our history. So chronology is a part of all these histories, but particularly with the second angel's message. Now, what are some other signs that tie this second decree to the second angel's message, other than the fact it's the second decree? Because when we think of the second angel's message, it's Babylon has fallen, right? But where has Babylon fallen in this history?
Yeah, it fell about 20 years or more before.
Yeah, so it's going to fall in, October 13th, 539 BC. So Babylon's going to fall 2 years before, 2.5 years technically, before Cyrus issues his decree. So how would we then look, what is it about this second decree that ties us to the second angel's message? Because it doesn't, Babylon has already fallen under, prior even to the first decree. So and we also have a call to come out of Babylon. So we had a call to come out of Babylon under Cyrus's decree as well. And we have a call to come out of Babylon under this decree. And then also under Artaxerxes' decree. So another question, and I know I'm asking a lot of these questions and we're not really giving all the answers to it yet. But in the first angel's message, there is a test and there's a failure of a test. And that failure of that test leads to the message Babylon has fallen, correct?
Yes.
Right. So that test was to Protestants in Millerite history, and they rejected the light of the first angel's message. And so then they weren't able to receive the light of the second angel's message. So in this history, who was tested under the first angel's message? And where did they fail? Or can we make that parallel?
Well, there were the people who stayed in Babylon.
Okay, so people stayed in Babylon. And that was under Cyrus's decree. So not everybody came out. Some stayed in Babylon. Now, what about okay, so let's try to, let me see if I can find this quickly. Okay, so here we have these reform lines. This is the reform line that begins the 2300 days at the top. That's the reform.
You're not sharing?
Oh, I'm not. Oh, right. I'm looking at something, not even sharing it. Hang on. There we go. So this is the reform line of the three decrees and the reform line of the three angels' message as I wrote it out a number of years ago. So there are things I have to sort of look at. And what I was looking at here was the first, second, and third decree and its relationship to the fourth decree, as well as the first, second, and third angel's message and its relationship to the fourth angel's message in Millerite history or early Adventist history in the first generation. So you can see both of them have a time of the end. So the time of the end is the time of the Babylonian captivity. And it happens first with the fall of Babylon on 539. And so if we paralleled 539, that is the fall of literal Babylon, what would we parallel it with in 1798?
The captivity of the papacy.
Yeah, so the captivity of the papacy. So, and we have done that in this movement because Ellen White plainly says that the 1260 years is just like the 70 years of the Babylonian captivity. Right? So she parallels those two captivities. And so the Pope being taken captive would be parallel to Belshazzar being killed. Correct?
Well, them 70 years are more aligning with the decree that ends with the death of Darius and the setting up of Cyrus.
Right. So what we see in the Babylonian captivity of 70 years for Babylon and 70 years in Babylon, and we bring those two together, that for 1798, at least that's the way that I do it. I don't see two different events in 1798 that I would mark unless there's something that we're missing. People understand what Stephen is saying, right? Anybody have any questions about this? Because when it comes to the time of the end, I mean, we mark the time of the end as the fall of Babylon in 539, or do we mark it as when Cyrus comes to the throne in the fall of 537, or do we mark it with his decree in 536, in the spring of 536? Because we basically have three different dates there. Now I've marked those here as the first angel empowered, the first angel formalized, and the first angel arrives, the first angel formalized, and the first angel empowered. So I just kind of mark those all together as the first angel.
I think you can connect that time of the end to a period of time.
A period of time? The time of the end is a period of time?
Well, we've connected the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989.
The 777 days.
Yes.
Right. So from
and you
the
have
yeah.
the birth of Aaron, the birth of Moses, the birth of John the Baptist, and the birth of Christ as periods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and those are things that I'm still not, because you have the arrival of the fourth generation with the birth of Aaron, right? The time of the end begins with the birth of Moses, right? In the fourth generation, because they're 3 years apart. And if we look at John the Baptist, where do we mark the time of the end? Is it the birth of John the Baptist or the birth of Christ?
Could it not be both?
Well, see, that's the point. Are they both, or do we does John the Baptist mark something else, right? So that's the thing that we've been unclear about. Different people have looked at these things differently at different times. Jeff has looked at them differently. So it's not as clear cut as that we just have one date for the time of the end. In some of these lines, they seem to be a lot of events that are tied together. Now, under the first angel's message or the first decree, you can see the first decree. I put the arrival of the first angel's message in 539 as being the time of the end, but that's formalized when Cyrus comes to the throne. But of course, that marks the end of the 70 years. So there are these two time prophecies, the 70 years for Babylon and the 70 years in Babylon, that are tied together. But then the decree that's issued by Cyrus, wouldn't that be the empowerment of that message that arrived? And the message is, we have this period of darkness, and then we have this increase of light. And so the increase of light starts at the time of the end. And in this case, I would have to say that would be in 539, when Babylon falls. Because what happens when Babylon falls? What happens in the first year of Darius the Mede? What prophecy is given? Daniel chapter 9, right? The 70 weeks.
Yes.
Okay. So that would have to be the increase of light in that period of darkness would have occurred in the first year of Darius, after the fall of Babylon. And then we're going to have, in the first year of Cyrus, what's going to happen in the first year of Cyrus? What prophecy is given?
Chapter 11.
Yeah, chapter 11. Now it says it's in the third year of Cyrus in chapter 10, when Daniel prays for 21 days. But we know that that's really the third year from the fall of Babylon. And that's just how Daniel writes it. So there's different ways in which you could describe Cyrus's reign. But so that third year of Cyrus is really what we'd call the first year of Cyrus. And that's what would be talked about in the book of Ezra, when it talks about the decree made in the first year of Cyrus. It's that issue. That issue is the decree going to be given? And so the empowerment of that message, does a mighty angel come down in 536?
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, right? So that would be the empowerment of the first angel's message. It would have to be based upon the signs that we have. Now, then the second angel arrives. And when would the second angel arrive in this history? I have it here as 520, and that would be the preaching of Haggai and Zechariah. Why would that be the arrival of the second angel?
There's two prophets. It's
Okay.
doubling.
Yeah, so there's two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, so we have that doubling. It's dealing with the second temple, whether that we want to take that as a doubling or not. And the question is, have people who have rejected the first angel's message, are they not benefited by the second angel? That is, if you didn't come out of Babylon, are you going to be benefited by the second angel's message?
No.
How can you be?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, in Millerite history, when they say Babylon is fallen, we know that they apply that to the Protestants. But are they not applying it to the Protestants because they now recognize that the Protestants have rejected the first angel's message and are now connected with Babylon? But Babylon actually fell in 1798.
Well, Ellen White, she says the Catholic Church apostatized and fell long before that time.
Yeah. Well, that's the apostasy. When we talk about Babylon falling in 1798, I mean, Babylon fell in 539. So what's the fall of Babylon in 539 that is paralleled in 1798? This isn't talking about a spiritual fall, right?
Yeah,
It's
the
the end,
literal.
yeah, the literal, the end of the kingdom. So so the apostasy has happened long before for the papacy, and that would be true of Babylon. But the actual fall, which we call the end of a kingdom, that's going to happen for the papacy in 1798 and for Babylon, literal Babylon, in 539. Now, the call to come out of Babylon, we know that Zerubbabel, who came out of Babylon in 539, he's a major player in this history in regard to the rebuilding of the Second Temple. That is, Zerubbabel is called by name, that he had begun it and he will complete it. And the name Zerubbabel means out of Babylon. So there is an out of Babylon there. So the arrival of the second angel's message must be the preaching of Haggai and Zechariah. Now, I placed here that the formalization of that message is Darius's decree. And the reason why I put it here is we have this out of darkness. We also have the laying of the foundation under Cyrus's decree. And then we have the work of the enemies. And then we have the second angel. Here I have it as being formalized there. How would we parallel that with Millerite history? Now, if you look at my chart below, I have the second angel in May 1842. So what would be the problem with that? So you can see this is an old chart I made. Because now we put the second angel arrives on April 19th, 1844. But here I had May 1842. So what was I doing here? What was I paralleling?
The charts, the 1843 chart.
Yeah, so the 1843 chart. Okay. And now that is that connected with the second angel or the first angel?
The first angel.
Yeah, the first angel. So I don't think this is correct to put May 1842. So the 1843 chart, what do we say it is?
Foundation.
It's the foundation, right? So that would be under the first angel's message, not the second. And actually the call to come out of Babylon. Now we know that the Protestants began to close their doors after the making of the chart in 1842. But they still had this opportunity to accept the first angel's message because it doesn't end until the end of Miller's prophecies. That is, sunset on April 18th marks the extremity where Miller's prophecies would apply, because he looks at the spring of 1844. And so April 19th now is the first day of the first month, and that the 2300 days in Miller's understanding of them would have passed by April 19th. But Samuel Snow understands that they should end in the fall. So that's going to be the second angel's message. So in trying to look at Darius's decree, what would we line it up with in Millerite history rather than the making of the 1843 chart? Angela, do you have a comment?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just logged on. I didn't realize I wasn't muted.
Okay. So anybody have any idea what would we mark as as parallel to Darius's decree in Millerite history?
The Midnight Cry.
Okay, so midnight cry. What if we just said midnight? That is Boston. Could we put it there? Because the midnight cry is given at Boston on July 21st, 1844 by Snow. Or does it have to be the midnight cry itself that we would parallel it with? Because as you can see on the chart, I put the second angel is empowered when the temple is dedicated, but maybe that's not correct. I mean, maybe we should look at Darius's decree as the midnight cry. So you can see the problem that I have here in this early chart too with Millerite history. I don't have, notice there's no midnight cry, arrival of the second angel, because back then when I made this chart, this would have been, I think, 2014. We had just got the midnight cry, and we hadn't yet even had midnight. And I think we just had come to understand that the midnight cry was August 15th. So you can see the problems here. There's a few little problems that we would have to do if we're going to correct this. So let's go to the book of Ezra. This is where we had left off before, was the decree of Darius. And we had shown that this would have occurred in 516 BC. And this was due to them searching for the records of Artaxerxes' decree and finding them, and then Darius issuing a decree to support Cyrus's decree, right? So Cyrus's decree was found, and then Darius gives his decree. Over 20 years before, over 20 years after Cyrus's decree. And then the temple is going to be finished, and it's going to be finished in that Jewish year. So the decree is issued sometime between the spring and the fall of 516 BC. But the temple itself will be completed on the third day of the 12th month. They're going to have this dedication ceremony. And so Ezra 6:14, Ellen White talks about this. The elders of the Jews builded and they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they builded and finished it according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. Now notice, this is in the time of Darius, and Artaxerxes, he's still going to be, 60 years in the future. So Artaxerxes' decree, I think it's going to be 59 years or whatever later that you're going to have Artaxerxes' decree. Actually, probably 58 years, because we're in the spring of 515. So Artaxerxes, why is he mentioned in the 6th year of Darius? Because they built it and finished it in the 6th year of Darius. So why is Artaxerxes, who's going to make a decree 58 years later, why is he mentioned here?
Well, Ellen White, she says Cyrus initiates Darius
Yeah, the way I always do it is commences, completes and confirms, something to that effect, or the other way around. So the statement that Ellen White makes, I'll read this here. So this is in the Great Controversy. She says, in the 7th chapter of Ezra, the decree is found, and that's verses 12 to 26 she has, in its completest form. So this is talking about Artaxerxes' decree, issued by Artaxerxes, king of Persia, 457 BC. But Ezra 6:14, the house of the Lord at Jerusalem is said to have been built according to the commandment, that is decree, of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. These three kings, in originating, reaffirming, and completing the decree, brought it to the perfection required by the prophecy to mark the beginning of the 2300 years, taking 457 BC, the time when the decree was completed, as the date of the commandment. Every specification of the prophecy concerning the 70 weeks was seen to have been fulfilled. So what she's saying here is that all three decrees are needed to bring about the perfection required by the prophecy. So the prophecy here is the prophecy of the 70 weeks. That's Daniel chapter 9. So why are these three decrees needed to bring the completion of required by this prophecy? What is it about these three decrees? Why is there three decrees? Why is there three decrees? How's that first? Break the question down.
Three angels' messages, three decrees.
Okay, well, there's three angels' messages, and we have three decrees. But why does there need to be three decrees according to Daniel's prophecy? So if we go to Daniel's prophecy,
Well, it wouldn't,
yeah, okay, got some thoughts.
you wouldn't be able to confirm complete in whatever Ellen White says, those words.
Okay, yeah, but why?
From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build.
Okay,
Would
so that
be something?
yes, okay. So when we look at this, the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build. Now, most Adventists read this wrong. And that's partly due to how the King James writes it. Because it says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. So we just read that as one thing. Now I'm just gonna show you here Bishop's Bible. So click on this verse so I don't have to scroll down. So in the Bishop's Bible, this is a Bible that predates the King James. And so it's gonna have this funny text and everything. But it says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to bring again the people and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So how do we see it here in the Bishop's Bible?
It's broken into three different.
Okay, there's three steps.
Yeah.
Now, these three steps are all under Artaxerxes' decree. But remember that each of these decrees are going to be typified, or they are going to typify what happens in Artaxerxes' decree. That is, when Adventists look at this, we see these different decrees. We actually have 4 decrees. You'll have Cyrus's, Darius's, Artaxerxes' first decree, and then his second decree, which we often call Nehemiah's decree.
But isn't it a three in one combination?
Yeah, it's a 3-in-1 combination. Yeah. So the way that we look at it is we have to choose which one. And so we choose Artaxerxes' decree because it happens to be 490 years to the stoning of Stephen. And so that gives us that decree. Now, there are other people who look at the chronology differently, and that is, they get confused between Artaxerxes and Xerxes. And so they put Artaxerxes' first year 10 years earlier, and they will actually use Artaxerxes' second decree to line up with the time of Christ. So they take what we put in 444 BC, they're going to put in 454 BC, and they're going to count from that to the crucifixion of Christ, the first 69 weeks, and then they're going to take that final seventh week and put off into the future and stuff. So there's all different ways people do this. But when we look at the Bible clearly, we see that first decree can only be fulfilled, or the start of the 70 weeks can only be fulfilled by the events completely at Artaxerxes' decree. That is, it's going to have all of the specifications of the prophecy. But the first two decrees are necessary for Artaxerxes' decree to come into effect. So when Ellen White and the Bible, tie these three decrees together, they tie them together because they are tied together in the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9. Does anybody have questions on that? Is that clear? Just maybe to help a little bit here, I'll go to one of my charts. Now this chart has lots on it, so kind of don't look at everything. I just want you to look at the bottom there. So in this decree, this is the decree of Artaxerxes in 457. The going forth of the decree occurs from the first day of the first month to the 12th day of the first month, right? That's the period of time, if you want to just use the first day of the first month, when Ezra comes out of Babylon. He begins his journey from Babylon to Jerusalem. And the return of the people would be on the first day of the fifth month when they arrive at Jerusalem. And then to build is this period of time from the first day of the fifth month to the 20th day of the ninth month. This is where Artaxerxes' decree is put in place. And we're going to look at his decree in a bit more detail as well. Especially when we get to the third decree. Right now, we're looking at the second decree. But can we see that the third decree has in it all three decrees?
Yes.
Because what was Cyrus to do first in the first place? What was his decree about? Like when we go back to Ezra chapter 1 and we look at Cyrus's decree, the work of Cyrus.
The commandment to build.
Yeah, so he has all three of those in there, right? The one is the laying of the foundation of the temple, saying to Jerusalem that thou shalt be built, and also that the people would be released from captivity. Right? Now he focuses here, he hath charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. But we also know when we looked at Isaiah chapter 44 and 45, where it talks about Cyrus, the Lord's anointed, that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasure, saying even to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid. And thus saith the Lord his anointed to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. I will loose the loins of kings. That's Belshazzar's knees knocking into each other. To open before him the two leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee and make crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. So we're going to see that Cyrus initiates this whole series of decrees. So you need Cyrus's decree in order to have Artaxerxes' decree, because you need Cyrus's decree in order to have Darius's decree, and you need Darius's decree in order to have Artaxerxes' decree. You can't have a third without a first and a second. That's as simple as I can make it. Does that make sense?
I think your
Sure.
point is one that has been addressed several times.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's an important point though. Now, when we look at this, we have another detail that's very, very important. And we're going to see the house was finished on the third day of the month, Adar. So that's the third day of the 12th month, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. So that's going to be March 12th. So the third day of the 12th month happens to be the 12th day of the third month on the Julian calendar in 515 BC. And that's an interesting little detail, because what does that tell us about this date, the third day of the 12th month, lining up with the 12th day of the third month in Ezra 6:15? What does this tell us?
It is like a mirror.
Okay, it's a mirror, yeah. And it tells us, so it's a mirror. A mirror is an important thing, of course, but it tells us also that there's a connection between these two calendars that is providential. And in some ways, it's, from a human perspective, that would be completely arbitrary. We just have this calendar created by Julius Caesar, and we're looking at it, in the past, so long before it was created. And it happens to line up with this date. And so people would just say, well, it's some kind of coincidence. It doesn't mean anything. But it's not something that happens very often. Definitely it's a rare occurrence, and it occurs here. But it occurs here in a very specific way. And when we tie this to Millerite history, as we will do, you'll see that this is quite important. Now, when they finish on the third day of the 12th month, the next thing, of course, is they've completed this temple. They're going to have a Passover. So they're going to have their dedication of this. 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and a sin offering for Israel, 12 he-goats according to the number of tribes of Israel. So they're going to have these offerings. And then it says in verse 19, and the children of the captivity kept the Passover upon the 14th day of the first month. Now, the Passover becomes an important detail. Now, I don't want to get too much into Snow's letters here, because there's a lot in there, so I'm not going to look at everything about them. But what we will do is, I guess I'll bring up this one. It's a lot of, this is a very busy chart here. So I'll switch screens. So very, very busy chart. But when you look at this chart, I don't know what to point you out to, other than we're going to look at this date here, 515 BC. So I have all these different dates on the bottom lined up with Millerite history. And this third day of the 12th month, this is in 515 BC. It's Ezra 6:15. And when we look at Samuel Snow's letters, This lines up with his first letter that's published on February 22nd. So I'll zoom in. There's just too much. So he's going to have his first letter published on February 22nd on the 13th day of the 12th month on the biblical calendar in 1844. So that was the first thing I noticed when I began to look at Samuel Snow's letters. And so that third day of the 12th month jumped out at me right away because I knew about the third day of the 12th month with the dedication of the temple. Now, why would that be significant with Samuel Snow's letters in the context of this second decree? What is Samuel Snow's letters about?
About the end of the 2,300 years.
Okay, but it's the second angel's message, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, right. So Samuel Snow is proclaiming the second angel's message. And the first time it's published that Jesus is coming back in the fall is published in the Midnight Cry. That's the periodical that's published on, I think it's published on Thursdays. So somebody could look that up because the Signs is published the day prior on the Wednesdays. But anyway, so he had no choice about when this is going to be published. And he's obviously not thinking about the dedication of the temple, and he doesn't understand the Jewish calendar that well to know, but it's published on that date. And then it's going to be republished. And what date is it republished on?
April 3rd.
So it's going to be republished on April 3rd, 1844. And April 3rd, 1844 is the Passover that was kept by the Jews in 1844. Now, that's not the true Passover, because the true Passover is going to be May 2nd. Because if the first day of the first month is April 19th, then May 2nd is the true Passover. But his first letter is going to be published on the date of the dedication of the temple that we see here in Ezra chapter 6. And then it's going to be republished on the Passover that follows. So can we say that the publication of his first letter and his second letter is connected? I mean, his first letter, the publication of his first letter and the republication of his first letter is connected. That would be connected, wouldn't it? It's the same letter. And then we can connect it to these two dates in the book of Ezra. Correct? So does that tell us that Samuel Snow's message, does it verify that Samuel Snow's message is the correct message? The foundation of the temple has been laid, has it not? By the time Snow begins his preaching, the 1843 chart has already been there. And so now Samuel Snow is going to be presenting this message, which is going to be dealing with the completion of the temple in Millerite history. And under this decree, under the second decree, there's a Passover associated with it. Can we see that?
Yes.
Now the third angel's message arrives October 22nd, 1844. And that's going to parallel with Artaxerxes' decree, as we will see. So to me, this is extremely significant. And I know we've seen it before, many of us have studied this out. But really, when we're starting to look at this second decree, and we're starting to look at at how the 2520 and the 2300 days are all interlocked with each other, that the 220 years that marks the prophecy of Leviticus 26 being fulfilled for literal Israel, that it's going to end with these decrees, the first decree, the second decree, and the third decree. And that these line up with the first, second, and third angel's message. And that Samuel Snow's message is the second angel's message. Now, the question is, for this movement right now, what message are we proclaiming?
I would think that we should be proclaiming the restatement of the first, second, and the third angel's message.
Okay, that's true, because in order to proclaim the third angel's message, which is going to be our message after the Sunday law, because that's the proclamation of the third angel's message. This movement, though, in particular, at the present time, is tied up in the second angel's message. That is the first angel's message Jeff presented prior to 9/11. And since 9/11, when the mighty angel of Revelation 18 came down with the falling of the buildings, the Twin Towers, that was the arrival of the second angel's message. And that's the message we are proclaiming at the present time. Now, we have to, of course, the first angel's message is not neglected, but our primary focus at the present time is the second angel's message. Now, what would Adventists say that they're proclaiming right now?
The third.
The third, okay. Now, it's true, we're under the proclamation of the third angel's message. Ellen White's quite clear about that the third angel's message arrived October 22nd, 1844, and that we're under the proclamation of that third angel's message. And it will be joined by the angel of Revelation 18. And then that message will swell into a loud cry. And that will be the proclamation of the third angel's message, empowered. And that occurs at the Sunday law. Now, we know that this movement, even Jeff's part of this movement prior to 9/11, is that his focus was upon the Sunday law. That's what we found in examining the foundation. That was his message, was the Sunday law is coming, and that's still our message. But that's the second angel's message. It's connected to the third, because in the second angel's message, we're saying the third angel is going to arrive. And that would be the Sunday law, right? So the second angel's message is a warning about the coming Sunday law. And the third angel's message can only be proclaimed when what happens? What is needful for the third angel's message to be proclaimed in power?
When there is a people ready.
Okay. Christ's character will be seen upon his people.
And when the people are in unity.
Yes, because they're connected with Christ. So that proclamation of the third angel's message under the loud cry is not, people are won not by argument, not so much by argument, but by the unction of the Holy Spirit. That is, Christ's character is seen upon his people. And the church always wants to bypass that, because that's a pretty difficult thing. We have no control over that as a church, other than that we have a responsibility as individuals. So the church figures some kind of machinery needs to be put in place, some kind of method of evangelism that we can reach everyone. And the church has constantly been doing this. And even when we talk about unity, that can't be something that's forced. It can't be just created or manufactured by a top-down system of organization. That is, unity doesn't come about through organization. True organization comes about through unity. You can't put the cart before the horse. So in this case, when we look at Samuel Snow's message, this is the message of the second angel. It's the second angel's message here at this part. But we also know that it's going to be tied up into these other dates in Millerite history, but these dates themselves are also tied up with the second angel's message. Even though Artaxerxes' decree that we're looking at here in 457 is the third angel's message, but it's the arrival of the third angel that really occurs on the 10th day of the 7th month, not the empowerment of the third angel. The empowerment of the third angel, out of all the reform lines that I've looked at, none of them have an empowerment. In every single case, when the fourth arrives in the first generation after a reform line, instead of the message being empowered, there's a type of failure that occurs. It's only in our history that the third angel's message will be finally empowered, and that will be at the time of the Sunday law. So I know this is a really busy diagram, but I just want to deal with this other part here. So we know that Samuel Snow's first letter is published on these two dates that we see in Ezra 6. But his second letter, which is the one that talks about the 31 AD with the crucifixion of Christ in the midst of the week, is his second letter has what significance that relates to the first letter? What is the date, May 2nd, in 1844?
It's the Passover.
Yeah, it's the Passover, and it's the true Passover. In the middle of that is April 19th. And April 19th is the dividing line between the first and the second angel's messages. That is, the rejection of the first angel's message is complete on April 19th for the Protestants. So if you're a Protestant and you were a Millerite, you would have most likely believed that March 21st, 1844 was the end of Millerite's prediction. And if that time had passed and you had given up the faith, you would have seen the 14th day of the 13th month as it would be the first month in your thinking. And so Miller's prophecy has failed. And so when you come to April 19th, you're not even looking for Christ to return. Right? Because in order to have the first day of the first month is April 19th, you have to have accepted the chronology that would point to October 22nd, 1844. So if you rejected the first message, you can't be benefited by Samuel Snow's message. And here we can see that the issue in Millerite history was one of chronology. And that happened in this movement. That there was many who left this movement over the issue of chronology. So now we have Samuel Snow's letters. His first letter is published on the date of the dedication of the temple, and it's republished on the false Passover in 1844. And then his second letter is published on the true Passover. And there's more. We'll look at his letters in more detail when we deal with Artaxerxes' decree. Now let's take a look at some other aspects of Haggai's prophecy. So when we go to Haggai and Zechariah, who prophesy, we can see Haggai has this command to rebuild the temple. In the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Josedek, the high priest, saying, Thus speak the Lord of hosts, saying, This people say, the time is not come, the time of the Lord's house should be built, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Now, notice that there are two people that Haggai's message is going to come to. That's Zerubbabel and Joshua. What's the significance of this? Who's Zerubbabel and who's Joshua, according to what it says here?
Church and state.
Church and state, right? The governor and the priest, the high priest. So we have this message to rebuild the temple, and it's given in this context. And we have two people as well. So there's a doubling there again. And this is going to be church and state are involved in some way. And Angela asked the question, could 4/19/1844 and July 18, 2020 be the same? Are they connected? No. July 18, 2020 is connected to October 22nd, and April 19th is connected to November 9th, 2019. But thanks for the question. Okay. So he's going to call this call because they dwell in their houses and they're neglecting the temple. That's the main message that he's going to give here. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the son of Josedek, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and did the work in the house of the Lord of hosts, their God. And in the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king. So it's going to be the 24th day of the 6th month. He begins prophesying on the 1st day of the 6th month. And then it says, in the 7th month, in the 21st day of the month, came the word of the Lord by the prophet Haggai, saying, Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and Joshua, the son of Josedek, the high priest, and to the residue of the people, saying, Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes in comparison of it as nothing? Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, saith the Lord, and be strong, O Joshua, son of Josedek, the high priest, and be strong, all ye people of the land, saith the Lord, and work, for I am with you, saith the Lord of hosts. According to the word that I covenanted with you when ye came out of Egypt, so my spirit remaineth among you, fear not. So, Dwight, what would be the significance of this verse? If Dwight's there. Dwight, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so what would be the significance of this verse, verse 5 of Haggai 2?
Outside of this, coming after the Day of Atonement and about the time of after the Feast of Trumpets,
Mhm.
or no, Feast of Tabernacles, sorry.
So the 1 and 20th day of the 7th month is which day on the Jewish calendar?
Would have been right at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles.
Yeah, it's right at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. So the Feast of Tabernacles is from the 15th
15th day,
to the 22nd, right?
right?
So this is just right at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, now, but we have that this message is coming then to Zerubbabel and Joshua and all the people, the remnant, the residue, and he's going to refer back to the covenant that they made when they came out of Egypt. Which covenant is that?
Well, since this is going to both church and state, it's being referenced to the covenant that was given to all of Israel, rejected by Israel, and then goes to the priests alone.
Okay, so they're going back to the covenant that goes to everyone,
Okay,
right? Is that that's what you're saying here? He's going back to the covenant that's made with all the people,
correct.
which is the everlasting covenant, was what it was supposed to be. That's what he covenanted. Because God made a covenant, and that covenant they break. Because they said, all the Lord has said we will do and be obedient, but they couldn't keep that covenant. Because the fault was with them, with their promises, not with God's promises.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you go through this portion of it,
Mhm.
because we're dealing with this on the 1 and 20th day of the month, and that would look to be in the second year of Darius.
Yeah, it's in the second year of Darius. Yeah.
So within 3 days, if we go down to verse 10,
Yep. On the 4 and 20th day of the 9th month, that's not going to be 3 days. That's going to be 2 months and 3 days.
2 months and 3 days. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're given quite a time period there to listen to this, right?
Yep.
And to make a decision. So how many days is that?
Well, it's roughly 62 days, depending. It could be 63. Depends how those months lay out. I haven't counted it. But let's say it's 63 days, at least in complete number.
Okay.
So that's half of 126. And
Exactly.
that number is shown up in our structure.
Yes.
Okay. And it's a symbol of Pentecost, the 6th day of the 3rd month, 63. Okay, so it says here, so he's going to talk about how the glory of this latter house shall be greater than the former. Now, of course, this is referring to the second temple, because Christ is going to enter as fully man and fully God into that temple.
Right.
Right. So but we can also apply this to our time. Is the glory of the latter house going to be greater than the former? When Christ's character shall be seen upon his people, that's the temple that's being built right now, is God's church. And Christ is going to be glorified in his church, in his people.
It's going to be the temple that is built with living stones where they are able to represent his character throughout the entire world.
Mhm. And then when we go to Haggai in the next part, it says, in the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, ask now the priests concerning the law, saying, if one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with his skirt touch bread or pottage or wine or oil or any meat, shall it be holy? And the priests answered and said, No. Then said Haggai, if one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? And the priests answered and said, It shall be unclean. Then answered Haggai and said, So is this people, and so is this nation before me, saith the Lord, and so is every work of their hands, and that which they offer there is unclean. And now I pray you consider from this day and upward, from before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple of the Lord, since those days were, when one came to an heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. And when came to the press fat to draw out 50 vessels out of the press, there were but 20. And I smote you with blasting and with mildew and with hail, and with all the labors of your hands, yet ye turn not to me, saith the Lord. Consider now from this day and upward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, even from that day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider it. Is the seed yet in the barn? Yea, as yet the vine and the fig tree and the pomegranate and the olive oil hath not brought forth. From this day will I bless you. Now, there's a lot in this. So what is he asking him to consider from which day to that day? So when is the foundation of the temple laid? When do they place the first stone upon the other stone?
Are we speaking of the second temple or Solomon's temple?
We're speaking of the first temple, or the second temple, pardon me, because he's talking about the blessing that they're receiving now, that they've received since.
Well,
Right.
the problem, the issue that I'm seeing here
Yeah.
is that this is using a lot of typology. And
Yeah.
under the types of things that are both holy and the unclean,
Mm-hmm.
I think that God is showing that their sins have kept back the blessings that were promised.
Right. So God made a covenant with them, and he's going to keep that covenant, but they have to make that covenant with God.
They have to
They
keep
have-
that covenant with
Yeah,
God.
they have to keep that covenant with God.
And that's the one thing that they're not doing. I mean, when we look at this in a very figurative manner, is this not a letter to the church today?
Well, it's definitely a letter to this church, if not a letter to this movement.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But I'm using church and movement at this point interchangeably. I'm not referring to the corporate church.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's no doubt that that's what it is. It's a message to us.
So what sins are restraining God's blessings?
Well,
If we were to go back to Leviticus 25 before we get into Leviticus 26, that's part of this covenant. And how many of those items in Leviticus 25 are not being observed today?
okay, so explain. You answer the question for me.
Okay. We have a covenant. The covenant lays out the blessings. It said, here is what I will do. But if you don't want my blessings, if you don't wish my covenant and choose to walk against my covenant, here's what's going to happen, right? Isn't that really where we're talking about as far as a covenant?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Abraham had to walk between the separated carcasses of the animals.
Yeah.
So we understood that blood would be involved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our situation today is we are no different than the children of Israel, because we have come before symbolically Mount Sinai, because July 18th was Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
We've heard the thunderings. We've heard God's voice. We have agreed all that you have said we will do. But we've seen some that have decided, well, we're just going to go ahead. We want to return to Egypt, and we're going to worship the golden calf.
Mm-hmm.
So the movement now is down to just the Levites. The question is, are we willing to keep the covenant? I mean, when I look at this with Haggai, and I'm looking at Malachi,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at what Mrs. White tells us, how we need to compare Malachi, there are so many things that are beginning to jump off the page. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to keep and adhere to this covenant? God is willing to pour out his blessings. The reason that the Holy Spirit has not been poured out, I mean, it's been being poured out, yes. It's been falling all around us. But are we willing to accept it?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's definitely a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves. So we're going to look at this again tomorrow. We're going to look at Zechariah and look at his prophecies and try to understand this more thoroughly, because there's definitely things we don't understand. And those things we need to dig into, because there's definitely something going on here that needs to be understood.
There's a lot more that I think than a lot of people really do understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you once again for your message to us. We know that we have not obeyed your voice, that we have failed in many ways to do the work that you've asked us to do in ministering to others. We ask for forgiveness, and we ask that we can trust in your word and in your leading in our lives and in this movement. We ask that you can continue to work upon our hearts, that you can write your laws upon them, and that we can reflect your glory in all that we do. Be with each person now. Comfort us with your Spirit, which means to convince us of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And bring us together again to study your word, we ask and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.